Good afternoon. I'm Ross Lydell, the City Hall editor of the Evening Standard, and welcome to the final London Rising panel discussion on COVID-19 recovery and the circular economy. When we are hosting today in association with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're very grateful for their support. So today we're going to discuss how to deliver economic growth without harming the environment and paving the way for a low carbon London. And I'm joined by three top panelists who essentially know all you need to know about the circular economy. We have Joss Blériot from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Deputy Mayor Shirley Rodriguez, and Wayne Hubbard from London, formerly the London Waste and Recycling Board. So I think first off, the obvious question is, what is the circular economy? And I know if it's not circular, it might be linear, which might be how more people understand it. But perhaps, Joss, could you kick off and tell us what is the circular economy and why is it relevant to the situation just now as we try to recover from the pandemic?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for the introduction. Actually, you're helping me by alluding to linear because that's what characterizes the current model. So we take resources, we turn them into products, and usually they get discarded quite quickly after a first period of use. So that's the linear economy. It's inherited from the Industrial Revolution, and it is now, if not being completely challenged, seeing some obstacles on the horizon. So in terms of resource scarcity, in terms of the negative impact of these models of value creation that essentially rely on the consumption of finite resources. So we have stress on resources, we have environmental impacts, we have the fact that these models are not delivering as they once did. And now what we could be looking at in terms of a circular economy is making the best use of what we have in the system already. It's looking at those resources that we've extracted, turned into products, keeping them in circulation at the highest value. The circular economy relies on three principles, all underpinned by design. So it's about elimination of waste and pollution from the outset. It's about keeping those products and materials in use. And crucially, it is about the regeneration of ecosystems and natural systems. So it's about moving from a system that creates value by depleting to one that creates value by building social, environmental, and natural capital.
Is this a term that has been created or invented by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, or is it actually a term or philosophy that's been known for some time, but perhaps needs to transfer over into general awareness?
We definitely did not invent it. And the first occurrence of the term actually is in Chinese policymaking. So the Chinese Circular Economy Promotion Law in 2008 made use of the term, but it draws on various schools of thought. So you have industrial ecology, you have the cradle-to-cradle design philosophy, you have industrial symbiosis, natural capitalism. All these things aggregate and constitute a perspective of an economy that works in the long term within planetary boundaries, just a way to redefine prosperity as we know it. So it's been very prominent on the European Union agenda since 2012 now, and we see a lot of countries, regions, and cities, and London obviously is one of the pioneers, adopting it as a central pillar of their economic development strategy going forward. So it's really taken off at the moment. But to go back to your question, we can't claim the invention of it, definitely not.
Okay, thank you. Wayne, could we come to you next, please? And could you set the circular economy in a sort of London context in terms of what it means for the capital and how it can be grown and developed?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, first of all, we think that cities are the engine room of the circular economy because it's where most people live in the planet. It's where stuff is consumed. And a recent study actually by a network of the world's biggest cities, C40, found that the stuff that we consume is, in carbon terms at least, 60% greater than the emissions within our own boundary. The reason I mention that is because it's important, therefore, for cities to think about how they can apply circular economy to reduce the things that they consume and therefore reduce global demand to produce more and more stuff and therefore produce more and more emissions typically it's the northern hemisphere cities creating that demand from the southern hemisphere cities. So cities like London have a massive role to play, and we're lucky in London because we've got this fantastic, innovative, dynamic startup community. And in Re-London, we've certainly experienced that, supporting some of our most enterprising SMEs. And the circular economy also delivers, it delivers a cleaner environment. It delivers a safer environment, and it delivers a more pleasant environment. And there's a great opportunity to create jobs and wealth from the circular economy. So, this is the way forward. This is the economy of the 21st century, and cities have got a great role to play in that. And London is at the forefront of that development.
Thank you. And Shirley, obviously, Sadiq set very ambitious targets for greening London and improving the environment before the election, then came back in with a very sizable majority, almost as good as some chap called Sadiq Khan 5 years earlier. But what does this mean? He has set the target of making London carbon neutral by 2030. Do we measure the success of this by looking at carbon dioxide emissions? Is there another way to measure success? What does success look like here?
In terms of the circular economy, absolutely, it's about how we look at reduction in carbon emissions. But as Wayne pointed out, a lot of those are consumption emissions, and those are emissions produced by cities or countries outside of the UK. So I think one of the things that we're looking at is how do we measure that in terms of the growth of the low carbon and environmental goods sector, which is a very long terminology for basically saying the green economy, the green jobs that we all need and want. So Wayne talked a little bit about the dynamic entrepreneurs that we have here, both in clean tech but also now these circular economy businesses, and they're often startups. They're often coming out of working with universities. For example, we just had a winner of our Mayor's Entrepreneur Award for the environmental section, which was a company called Dye Recycle, working out of Imperial, which is about how do you reduce waste going to landfill by taking the dye out of materials, which is a fantastic concept. And if you look at some of the past winners or even the applicants, people are trying to make use of things that would be thrown away, either going to landfill or incineration, and as Josh said, a complete waste of our environmental resources. So back to why we're doing it, why the Mayor has adopted this approach, is because we see this as the jobs that we need to help London transition to as we recover from the economic and social impacts from Covid-19. We're facing, just as many other cities are, huge problems in terms of an impact on economic growth, particularly for people who are young or who are Black, Asian, and from the minority ethnic groups. So how do we help them move into the jobs of the future? But actually, I call them the jobs now, because they're absolutely jobs that people want now.
It's obviously London's well known for its financial services, for the nightlife economy as well. Just a few days ago, Sadiq was over in Perryvale with his high-vis jacket on. Son of a bus driver was launching a fleet of hydrogen buses. Is that the kind of thing that we can be looking at in terms of where these new jobs are, whether it's greener forms of transport or just recycled goods, whether it's even, tube seats being turned into face masks?
Absolutely. I was with Sadiq at that launch. The first 20 hydrogen buses of in a capital city is part of our massive move to decarbonise London. Electrify our bus fleet or move it to zero emissions, so including hydrogen. But those are exactly the types of jobs. So when people talk about green jobs, we're not just talking about low skilled jobs. We're talking about a range of jobs that really meet the needs of all Londoners, whether it's green finance in the City of London, to the engineers and the designers who come up with these new uses for old materials, the scientists, the modelers, the fitters of our solar panels, all of these things, but particularly on the circular economy, because it's such a new sort of concept for entrepreneurs. It is really about SMEs, startups, and London is absolutely the capital for that. And we want to retain that and grow that as part of London's recovery. And really, it's a key feature of making sure that London is competitive with our with other cities, including our flagship cities, our EMF flagship cities of Sao Paulo and New York. We want to be the lead city for circular economy and recovering from the pandemic.
And just finally on this point, to help viewers understand, in terms of the scale of the London economy and the sort of slice of the apple pie that might be devoted just now to green jobs and how big that could become, do you have a sense? Are we talking 1 or 2% just now, or is it actually already much bigger than that?
It is a huge sector. It's sort of bigger than the housing and construction sectors combined, which is, people wouldn't expect that. But, that's partly because we're counting the jobs that people wouldn't think necessarily is green, like the financiers and the architects and the designers and the engineers and so on. But the point is that London, particularly this week, this coming week, we're talking about London Climate Action Week. We're a hub of these new green jobs, and really it's a way of leveraging that and making it bigger, which is absolutely Sadiq's ambition.
Thank you. Wayne, can you then tell us now a bit about what Re-London is doing to support businesses? Because I believe as well there's essentially 5 key sectors that are involved here, the likes of food, plastics, textiles, electricals and electronics. But can you tell us more of the work that you're doing in each of these sectors and which are, why these ones were chosen and which are showing promise?
Sure, yeah. Well, we support circular economy businesses, and a circular economy business, as we define it, is a business that minimizes waste or makes something from recycled material, a business that is making stuff recyclable or capturing it at the end of its life, a business involved in sharing, making things well, or renting. So those 5 things, and then we focus on those 5 areas that you mentioned at the start. We did a piece of work a few years ago, actually, that kicked all this off for London, which identified those as key areas of importance for London from both an environmental and an economic perspective. Lots of cities do this, and they all have similar kinds of focus areas. Food, for example, is massively important when it comes to reducing carbon emissions because of the you can't flick a wind power switch and everything will be all right with food because of the way it's grown and the energy that goes into that. So you have to change your behavior. So that's really one of the important things, that we need to see, behavior change. And the beauty of all of this is lots of people are choosing these businesses, are buying products and services from these businesses, not because they feel they have to do anything differently or better, although that's great if they do. They do it because these businesses are offering better services, more interesting services. And there seems to be a mood afoot to just get rid of all of the stuff that we carry. A lot of people probably in my generation, younger than my generation, have reached peak stuff. So they want to borrow stuff or rent stuff or have peer-to-peer exchanges. Depop has just become a massive company, Vestair Collective, all of these businesses that do interesting things with clothes, or Olio, who do interesting things with food, and it's of its time right now. So we support them. These businesses, there's lots of London-based businesses which we support by offering free advice and support, not sustainable advice, just good business advice. And we also provide through the Mayor's Green Investment Fund, the GLIF, the Greater London Investment Fund, we provide venture capital to SMEs, probably one of the only, if not the only, significant venture capital fund that's ring-fenced for circular economy businesses in the world. And we've got some investments there. So we've got we've had something like 200 businesses. They're really interesting stuff. Every time I hear about a new business, it's just this great ideas that are coming out of London, and it just feels it's of its time. So we can create jobs, we can create, a thriving economy. And by doing that, we just make the world a better place. I mean, it's just an amazing story, really. It's kind of like circular economy, magic dust. It's beautiful.
Well, it's certainly very true. If you were to look in my attic here in Walthamstow, you'd find there's certainly too much stuff in this house. Although I have to say, I think there's you can never have too much vinyl, actually. Although obviously from a second-hand shop, you'll be delighted to hear.
Well, there you go. Look, there you go. Right. So Apple Music, Spotify, those kinds of things, they're circular economy now. Okay, so vinyl's come back in, but I bet you're buying second-hand vinyl right now, are you?
Yeah, there's a fantastic second-hand record store in Wood Street in Walthamstow that I would thoroughly recommend. But let's keep going. Joss, back to you then. What sort of work is the foundation doing then to help the circular economy? And can you put London's position into a bit of a global context? Who are our rivals? Who should we emulate?
I'll pick up on your vinyl example because it's quite close to my heart as well. And I think that what's important in this model is that what we're talking about here is circulation of value. So it's keeping things in the system and making sure that there's access provided to people like you and me to have pre-owned or to have access to tool libraries and things that really make sense on paper, but make much more sense in reality when it's located in a city. Because if you're going to borrow something, if it's around the corner, a few steps away from you, it's really easy. It makes a bit less sense if you have to drive 10 miles, but this is why cities are so important. And London's doing a great job in supporting SMEs, but also looking at procurement and the use of potentially vacant plots of land or stores to have these library of things, to have these repair cafes, which also are a hub of innovation and upskilling. You can really play on the interface between the job markets, the involvement of citizens, the entrepreneurship. So all of that is really good. In terms of London's position, I don't think we want to identify rival. I think we'd want to identify collaborators for London. And London certainly is really a pioneer in the circular economy world by linking also very clearly this strategy with the low carbon aspirations of the city, because there's a push on climate, and we've seen that in the past. It's always been looking at specifically energy efficiency and transition renewable, and the material side of the economy has been a bit neglected. When in fact our research shows that 45% of global GHG emissions come from the stuff we make and we use, and that includes the food, and Wayne alluded to that. So really focusing on these things and joining the dots, putting those agendas together is key. And London's doing that in a really efficient way. What I'd like to also highlight is the food flagship initiative, which brings together organizations from across London's food system, to identify those opportunities for creating a food system that's healthier, more resilient, and localized. And we're really proud to be partnering on that specific initiative as well. And it's worth sharing actually that we encourage interested food organizations that might be listening right now to get involved with the initiative and identify how they can play a role, and also how they can be identified and highlighted as a pioneer, because that's one of the important things. It's also about looking at how to make those solutions visible. On the international spectrum, you have Cleveland, you have Amsterdam, Toronto. A lot of cities are doing great things. And of course, Sao Paulo and New York are two other strategic partner cities. But what's interesting maybe to highlight is that in a lot of cases, cities are very agile and they can move quicker. If I take the example of Paris, Paris has had a circular economy roadmap that predated the national circular economy roadmap by 2.5 years. And it's great to see that the national policymakers are looking to cities for inspiration when they wrap up their plans. So, that could be a call for national policymakers in the UK. Look at what London's doing.
Thank you for that. Shirley, I'll come back to you now. Let's bring it back to London. Now I'm sort of coming to you live from the heart of mini Holland here in Waltham Forest, which has been one of the pioneering boroughs for transport and promoting cycling and walking. A couple of weeks ago, your fellow Deputy Mayor Heidi Alexander was bold enough to sort of name and shame Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster for not doing enough to help cycling in London. But I don't know whether you would want to necessarily highlight the boroughs that are not quite at the head of the race. But could you give us one or two boroughs you would say that are promoting good practice in London in terms of the green economy? Are there other areas we can learn from, or who's in your good books?
I think pretty much most of them are in our good books, and it's not even our good books. I talked about the London Recovery Board, which we co-chair with London councils, who are the representative body of all 33 local authorities. As ever with local authorities, they do things differently because they have different strengths and different priorities. So I was on a call yesterday with both the City of London, Catherine McGuinness, and Georgia Gould, the leader of Camden Council. And, all three of us were talking about what urgency of action before COP26, and obviously around the low carbon but also circular economy. And Catherine was talking about what the City of London could be doing in terms of really pushing ahead on the green finance sector, but we all need that, because we need that finance mobilized into the sorts of things that we're all doing around retrofit or new transport or indeed circular economy projects. Georgia was talking about some of the work that Camden were doing on retrofitting primarily, but also how they were engaging their citizens, using some of the recommendations that they were making. For example, some of the things like street space schemes, like the sort of mini Hollands that people are keen on, or active travel. Lots of boroughs have declared climate emergencies or are declaring developing climate action plans, and at the heart of them are approaches around how do we move to zero waste and taking that circular economy approach, because they realise it's good for both jobs, but also it's about post-pandemic, around people understanding they wanted want to retain a bit of a different approach to life. Wayne talked a little bit about this is the moment now. And at a strategic level, the mayor had already espoused tackling climate change, zero waste, and integrating those two in his suite of strategies from the London Plan, which looks at how we build new development. But actually, we've now got a pioneering circular economy policy, which requires developers coming forward to set out what are they going to do about the whole life cycle of their of the embodied carbon. How can they make sure that they reduce the call on resources by reusing materials that were already on site, for example, through to, you mentioned the economic development strategy. So this is at the heart of it. How do we make these new green jobs? The environment strategy is very much about how do we make and encourage people to produce less waste in the first place, and then when we do have some, how do we reuse it, which goes to the circular economy. And at the very end, if we have to dispose of it, how do we make sure we capture, for example, waste heat to power and heat our homes, through heat networks. So it's absolutely critical and at the heart of everything that we're trying to do in London. But we're not doing it alone. Many businesses are taking on this challenge, as well as local authorities.
And it might seem a good time to ask you about ULEZ just now as well, in the context of the circular economy. That's one of your key areas of work as well. And obviously it's due to expand to the North and South Circulars in October. On the Evening Standard, we had a reader's letter the other day who was puzzled by the fact that, what is the economic cost of scrapping an older car that's still probably reasonably fuel efficient? If the circular economy is about reusing old things until they're essentially worthless, how does that fit in then to the idea of getting rid of 7-year-old cars?
Well, if we're asking people to comply with the ultra low emission zone, one of the ways of doing that is to take on a less polluting car. And what we've been encouraging people is to think about their travel choices. So that car, if it's not being used by the person that had it now, it will be used by somebody else. So there is a life. Some of the buses that we've cleaned up London's buses, 9,000 core fleet has now been transformed into Euro 6. So we've got the cleanest fleet ever, reduced NOx bus emissions by 90%. But those buses are being used elsewhere in the country, cleaning up the fleets and the air in other cities, and there's a knock-on effect. I mean, obviously there is a value, an intrinsic value in these things, and over time it diminishes. But you have to balance, we think, that value plus the impact that it has on health and a well-being of citizens in London.
Okay, thank you. Wayne, could I ask you as well for your thoughts on the work in the boroughs and so on, whether there's any projects that you've helped to sort of fund that you're particularly proud of, or you would say are great examples of what can be done?
Yeah, we're actually just starting to respond to a call from the Mayor of London in one of the recovery missions around neighbourhoods and the Future Neighbourhoods programme. So I would really like to see the future of circular economy work in the boroughs to be neighbourhood based, so we could see how you can bring together the great work that boroughs are doing on waste and recycling, and they are, the really good work that we are doing with SMEs and promoting innovative SMEs, and how that links with reinvigorating the high street and rethinking the high street. You know, if there are gaps on the high street, maybe they could be filled by repair cafes or shared workspaces, or, you know, whatever, vintage secondhand vinyl stores or whatever it is, that, you know. And then we could also see ourselves providing assets and tools to citizens, and seeing certain citizens being champions of the circular economy. I don't know about you, but in my local neighbourhood, we've got a little WhatsApp group, and people were always putting, you know, I want to share item X, or has anybody got a hammer or a pump for a paddling pool, or whatever it may be. You know, this happens. It happens unilaterally, and if we could tap into that thing that's happened as part of a growth in community cohesion brought around by lockdown, and kind of give that some oomph and some life and some form, and extend that in a bigger scale and scale it up at a neighbourhood, I do believe we can save the world a neighbourhood at a time. And I think that's a realistic thing, and also create jobs, create value, make nicer, more cohesive, more equal neighbourhoods. We have launched actually some money again from the Mayor of London's Green New Deal Fund for pilots businesses, and we're particularly interested in funding businesses led by Black, Asian, minority ethnic people, or female-led entrepreneurs. You know, we're looking to do all of that stuff, and seeing the circular economy as a way of really meeting inequalities and improving our communities, I think. So, and that all takes place at the borough level, and we're working with a number of boroughs to put together those plans.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You know, here in my neighbourhood here, my wife is an avid member of the Walthamstow Sailor Swap group on WhatsApp, and many, especially children's toys and clothes, get swapped quite readily in return, not even for money, but quite often for a bag of apples or carrots seems to be the sort of the going rate, and that's the currency. It's the sort of the modern day version of sort of free cycling. So it's Joss, but your turn again. Then, you know, you were talking earlier about New York, Sao Paulo, and so on. Is there a sort of a good reason for London to look abroad, or, you know, can cities easily work together to share ideas? Is there a structure set up? You know, is the C40 mayoral system a good way that we can all learn from each other?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and especially in the ramp up phase, when circular economy is going into scale and really ramping up in terms of demonstrator projects and innovation projects, engaging and exchanging with other stakeholders is absolutely crucial. It worked really well for the C40s on the topic of cities and climate, taking the leadership. The Covenant of Mayors have been extremely useful as well. What we see on the international stage as well, and in the multilateral process, you know, whether that's the G7, the G20, or COP, cities is all over the place now as a topic. You know, there was a report to the Prime Minister recently by Nicholas Stern from London School of Economics, highlighting design for cities and the design of cities in the climate landscape and mitigation efforts. So all of that is really showing that the focus is now understood. The fact that, as Wayne was saying, cities are the aggregators of all the value that's created in the economy. If you think of all the IT or the electronics that gets made in factories around the world, they all flock to cities. And especially when it comes to, you know, we've seen that in lockdown, you know, those supply chains are very brittle. And having a circular economy that helps make sure that the right resources are in the right place at the right moment when people need them. And we can, on top of that, displace the need for virgin materials with the additional environmental impacts that this has. Of course, collaboration is absolutely key, and cities are different. Some will focus on urban agriculture and have fantastic lessons to teach others. Other cities will look at the innovation and the tech startup, depending on the way their economic fabric is made and what drives their own GDP. They will have different strategies. And because it's a systemic change, no solution can be left unexplored.
Okay, we have just a few more minutes to go now on today's event. So I'd just like to ask all panelists really for your thoughts first, because earlier this week, Greater London was announced as a strategic partner of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You know, Joss, tell us what that means and why it will help to improve the chances of a circular economy developing?
Well, it's about really bringing the right stakeholders together. It's about bringing the economic rationale, the analysis, the case studies, all the work that we've been doing for the past 10 years, and really putting it on the table and saying, at the interface between private and public sector, knowing all of these things, looking at this analysis, having the figures, what can be done, how can we accelerate that transitions, which everybody agrees now is really important. It's about making the case. And of course, the more international exposure a city has, and London has plenty of that, it's a city that everybody looks up to. If London starts to do those things and really go hard on scaling them up, then it will create an emulation. And for us, it's absolutely critical to have a pioneer such as London as a partner that we can support, that we can help, that we can inspire, and that we can learn from, and also bring those examples out there to the other cities around the world, saying, look, London's doing this. This is the result that they're getting. It's about time that you guys get onto it as well. So it's an emulations game. It's about really transforming the market. It's about showing how systemic change can play out at city level. And with an iconic city such as London, it's absolutely ideal for us.
Thank you very much. And just to round off with a sort of quick fire round, really ask each three of you, what three things would you like to see for London's green economy, or green recovery rather? Shirley, would you like to go first? Can you give us your top three ideas?
Well, avoiding a car-based recovery. I would say that as working on the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone in October. But we know it makes a big impact, both in reducing pollution, but also, it really, our city just in terms of competitiveness, it's absolutely critical. Jobs. We've talked about the importance of green jobs and really making sure that the transformation of our economy really happens and happens fast. And the other one, I guess, is a toss-up really between, can we really mobilise the green finance from the finance sector in London? And I think we've been really trying, and as I said, working with the corporation, the City of London, and various financial institutions is really critical. But I guess if I could have a fourth, it would be really enabling people to make the change they want to make change. City gets letters all the time and texts and whatever about what are you doing about this, and it's Londoners who are demanding the change. So what can we do collectively as the mayor, the GLA, London partners like EMF, local authorities, businesses? How can we help people to do what they want to do, which is the right thing? So that would be my fourth.
Thank you. Wayne, give us your top three.
Well, I would have had Shirley's fourth, which is really brilliant, which is enabling Londoners to do what they want. I think that's what we like to do. So enabling Londoners to share more stuff, to have access to performance rather than owning stuff, so renting it, and to be able to have maybe fewer but better things, whether they buy them new or secondhand. So that's what I'd like to do, and I'd love to be able to be part of a system that's that saves the world one neighborhood at a time or one behavior at a time. So and all of this I'm sure will lead to a great opportunity for Londoners. And as Josh said, and I just want to reiterate this, cities can move quick. We're agile. We are the units of change all across the world. So we talk to cities all across the world, and we're all doing this. And I get the feeling that national governments are kind of slowly coming to the realization that this is happening and trying to catch up. But the cat is out of the bag. This is definitely going to happen. Cities are leading the way forward. So do watch this space, because this is the future. This is the economy of the 21st century. Thank
you. And finally, Josh, you've got the hardest task then of thinking up three ideas for London's green recovery without naming any of the 8 or so that have been mentioned already. Have you got any other ideas?
Well, clean mobility for sure. a regenerative agriculture at local level as well, and a built environment that is renovated and underpinned by circular economy measures whereby you can reuse the components and modularize the buildings. All of this, three pillars, with the strong participation of citizens and getting their ideas as well and enabling innovation to flourish, because that's another thing that cities have, is they have a concentration of talent, not only of stuff.
Okay,
Absolutely.
fantastic. Well, I'd just like to thank all three participants very much for your time. Wayne Hubbard from Re London, Deputy Mayor Shirley Rodriguez from City Hall, and Jos Biero from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And again, to repeat how grateful we are at the Evening Standard for the Foundation's support for this event and our London Rising campaign. Thank you all very much for watching, and thank you. Have a good day.